also wondering if you could speak as a rabbi and as a Jew. Is anything that you've heard Dawn say today shocking or new, or is this something that you have seen in Judaism now for a while, or others talking about?
Well, we're kind of focused on the oneness of the divine, which doesn't mean in any way that God can't entity effect God's self in different ways to different people, as obviously God does, because I as a person believe there is only one God, and that the Trinity and the Hindu gods and all of the different deities that you're calling on are indeed connected deeply to that God, if not the entirety of that God. That's just me. So it's not especially shocking. I think the most moving part was hearing your vision, was hearing what the goddess said to you at that moment. And I get, and you'll hear when I have a little bit more time to elucidate the power of action. And I think in that way I loved praying with you when I was at the Parliament. With my tefillin on, by the way, my ritual boxes. I would go and pray in the mornings with all these different people. And it felt very natural. It felt much easier in many ways to pray with the Wiccans than it did to pray with the Christians. Sorry. And we can talk a little bit about what it means to have the world be a large conglomerate in which you are a very small and somewhat not respected part. I think that's kind of the experience for both of our religions, or dangerous part. So there are ways in which I feel that our paths are similar in terms of assisting ourselves and our community to still find the value, the deep value, because of course both traditions are exceedingly old, in the, I'm going to use a term from Mordecai Kaplan, who founded my version of Judaism, which is Reconstructionism, in the folk ways of the people. That the magic is important. I can't imagine you doing magic without somehow evoking the deity from my perspective. And likewise, I understand that there are lots of people who might, like my brother, for instance, who circumcised his son with a ritual in the most traditional manner and does nothing else. But for whom that ritual was so meaningful and so important that he could not possibly not have done it. Right? And so the question that arises with me is, as you're attracting more people, in addition to raising up more witches, how does the joy that I see in people finding and people coming home, how do we distill that essence and use it elsewhere? Because it certainly, the Catholics need it, right? Maybe that the Catholics are supposed to end up Wiccans, but we need it too. We need to let go of the image of what organized religion has been, and here I think we're very different, and realize that it was something, but it still is something that is incredibly relevant to our lives. And so it's lovely to watch.
Well, and Reconstructionist Judaism is the Judaism I feel closest to. But I was on well, first let me say that there's some modern pagans who are what are called radical polytheists. And really focus on, no, it's not one, it's many. That's a distinct minority, and historically, it's non-existent. If you talk to pagans around the world, nobody thinks that way. Everybody thinks that there is a unitary divine, but that the pagan traditions tend not to relate to that divine with personality. Tend to say that divine is so all-encompassing by its nature that we limit it when we put faces on it. So we recognize the limitations of those faces and say, well, I'm going to relate to the gods and goddesses, or in another tradition it might be the ancestors or whatever. But recognizing that these are slices, these are different facets of the gem that help me understand the gem, while not being the gem, the ultimate one itself. And that's why we actually get along just fine, like witches and Muslims get along great, things. Because the thing that we have in common a lot, one is the focus on ritual, the importance of ritual as a way to engage the body and the person in their spirituality. It isn't just up in the head. That ritual actually gets your body involved. But also, I was on a panel at the Parliament in Cape Town, and Gerald Barney, who was a person who worked for Jimmy Carter preparing a report on the Millennium 2000 report, and there was the Global 2000 report, but basically what's happening and where are we going, and things are going to hell in a handcart environmentally. And he asked all the members of the Parliament Assembly, which is like 450 people, to fill out this questionnaire of 40 questions on what does your religion have to say about progress and as we're heading into the 21st century. And at first I thought the questions were just kind of ridiculous, because they said, how do you deal with the conflict between religion and science? Well, we don't have one. How do you deal with women being second-class citizens? Well, we have more priestesses than priests. But then I got into them and found them really interesting. And I got this, Barney recognized that 8 of the people who had answered the questions were at the Parliament. And so he invited us to be on a panel. And I was the only person that got the heads up that we would have 5 to 7 minutes to summarize our answers before speaking. And so I got an unfair advantage over everybody else. But trying to distill 40 questions down to 7 minutes, they said, what this really boils down to is that we focus on the immanence of the divine, that the divine is present ever and always, within us and around us and in everything, which requires a loving and respectful relationship to everything in the world. But also that if you're in such a relationship, that means that the world responds back. And so you tend to have a very lively spirituality in which the gods speak. The stones and the trees speak. Omens occur. But as I said, we don't have a corner on the market on immanence. Mm-hmm. Pretty much every spiritual tradition that I'm aware of has a concept of the immanence of the divine in it. It's just a question of to what extent is it emphasized, and how much in the pursuit of transcendence has the immanence been pushed aside. So it's not like you need to become one of us to reconnect. Just hopefully find that within your own tradition. And most of the religious traditions that I encounter have a much greater place for immanence than modern Christianity does. Modern Christianity seems, in my experience, to have gone the furthest in trying to say things of the world we put aside, and we turn to things not of the world. And yet the teachings about the importance of the immanence of the divine are still there. So, but I think that that's one of those things that we connect over.